everybody, and welcome to Sparing Partners. I am Monica Paolini and from Sensapili, and your host today. And my guest is Jim Allison, and he is the manager of planning at the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority, which is the hardest thing for me to learn. I worked with Jim for, I don't know, like at least 10 years, and I still don't know how to say it. Because we will say CCJPA, which doesn't really say what it is, but he will tell us, I promise you, and make it easy to understand what that is. But what we're going to talk about today is connectivity in transportation, and we're going to go from Wi-Fi to charging. As I said, I've been working with Jim for a very long time. And we've done work that was really like at the time was really ahead of everything else because we were working on Wi-Fi access, which now you take it for granted. But there was a time, believe me, where that was something that was brand new and it wasn't clear how to actually do it. And so that was really exciting at the time, even though, as I said, I now kind of take it for granted. And if it doesn't work well enough, we complain. At that point, we did all sorts of really cool stuff to make sure it was possible, not not actually well functioning. It was just possible was the thing.
Yes.
So, Jim, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. But let us know what is that you do and what CCJPA is.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join and see you again and follow kind of your arc. And I've been trying to take things on the arc too. So sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So for who I work for, the Joint Powers Authority, it's the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority. It's kind of all in the name, but you have to know what certain things are and what the amalgamation means. So the Capital Corridor is a route in Northern California for an intercity train. It goes from roughly the Sierra Foothills through Sacramento, the state capital, through the Sacramento Valley on into the Bay Area, and then it goes along the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area and ends down in Silicon Valley. So it's connecting, we say it connects the mega region of Northern California and is kind of along the backbone. It parallels a lot of the highways that connect those cities. So the Joint Powers Authority is the part that joins together the powers of government that exist along that route. And the government they're talking about are transit agencies. So we're made up of the different transit agencies that are local to a county or a city or a region. And then the authority is the combining of those powers together. So the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority is a governmental entity that was created from state legislation. And it sort of is a band-aid across things that don't normally exist. So you have county governments, you have state governments, you have local governments, but you do have regional governments, but we're actually operating in two regions from a governance perspective. So we're kind of this connective tissue across it. And then I'm the manager of planning, so I look after traditional rail planning work, tracks, stations, and other types of things, but then also technology. And I bet you can guess this is where I worked with Monica. So technology is the area where we've actually had probably the most success because it's very hard to do big projects or infrastructure projects. So technology is kind of the fun part of the job for me. So
Yeah, and actually, what you said, it's a lot of detail, but it's actually very relevant because you've been working on getting the technology out there in the world, but you have, in order to get that going, you need to interface with all of them. So a lot of our work, for instance, was with Amtrak, that is a national, obviously, entity. So it's really, I mean, if you're coming from telecom, and we have our own kind of complexity in telecoms, but I don't think nothing compared to what you guys have in transportation. At least in the US. I don't know, in other countries seems a little bit more streamlined, but it's just like I've never been able to really grasp all the
Yeah.
details, you know.
Well,
So,
it's easier
and
not
that's relevant to
tell
our
people.
discussion today.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, okay. So maybe you can tell us about, what is that you've done through time, and then we're gonna get to the present, to the latest challenge.
Well, we're a pretty small organization. We're hired to kind of administer funds and direct things, and then we contract with Amtrak for operations. So early on, because I was probably the biggest computer nerd person at the group, we got a call saying we'd love to put Wi-Fi on your train. And I was like, because Wi-Fi was just kind of coming out to the market right then. I was like, okay, I think I understand this. But quickly it was like, well, how do you backhaul this? And what are the options? And you had cellular options and you had satellite options, or you had trackside. And that's kind of still the way it is today, but things have gotten much better, especially on the satellite side of things, most recently. So and our first pilot we did with the company was comprised of this huge satellite dome that we had to be worried about. Was it going to get lopped off when it goes through a tunnel because had this huge profile. And then we had 2G, and so we split the uplink and downlink. And as I think you said, it was like it's there, but it barely worked. And the internet was less demanding those days, so that's all right. But since that point in time, that was a test with an early adopter of it. And they saw us and they said, oh, Silicon Valley, this is where they'll want the internet on the train. And it seemed like a good idea. People could be productive. But it took a number of years. There were some trials in the UK, in Sweden, and this is like 2003 and four. And then we started working together, I think around 2005 or so, trying to like, how should this be done, and what's the business model for it? And I think that's where you and I probably cut some ground. And we were wondering, dealing with radio spectrum, radios that were even in the industry, how is this all going to work? Should you do trackside? Is it good to control it? Or can you do trackside? And the answer in our case was no, you really can't. We even tried to work with our host railroad, which is a freight railroad, and they were like, nah, we don't want your radios and masts and other things in the right of way. And we tried different spectrums, and there was always some issues. So we were using unlicensed spectrum if you're going trackside, but you're still using unlicensed spectrum, of course, in the train. So it was quite an evolution. Then kind of different things emerged, and I think it was the free business model that we were kind of wondering about. A lot of entities were charging in second class, but would be free in first class. So they're trying to drive it. But as it turns out, if you can't control the backhaul, and it was pretty bad in those days, especially like in the UK, if you can't control that, you can't really offer quality, and therefore you're not getting much better in first class, or you're getting a really bad experience in second class. So given the package of things, I think we worked out the model, and you build a really good tool there to kind of see and uh, explain that the free model seemed to be the best one. The thing we did best was get people in seats, and if we had good Wi-Fi, that's a reason to ride the train versus something else. And then we eventually put it on the train, working with Amtrak, and right after that, we had a pretty landmark study for this niche industry with UC Davis to study. Did the free model deliver on what we were hoping it would? And through some, quite complicated statistics and surveys and things like that, this was in 2011 now, or 2012, they came out with a report that did validate the model, and we had like a 2.7 to 2.9% boost in ridership just because of having Wi-Fi. It was valued. And since then, we've been through the Gs, the 3G, the 4G. We're now heading to 5G. We're not there yet because things lag behind a little bit, but that has offered a lot more reliable backhaul and a better experience. And so, and people are used to it now. And I think we have a different way of staying on top of it than we did before. It takes a lot of diligence to be able to do more with the network than we might have imagined back in 2008 or so.
Yeah, that was quite an experience when we kind of realized that the free model was the best one. I thought there was a problem, there was a bug in Excel.
Yeah.
Uh, because you're educated to know that if you charge for something, you can be profitable. You can be profitable if you give something for free. Even though we had some, few examples some other places, but like you have to build a whole infrastructure and but if you just sell a few more tickets, it's more effective because people actually do not, I mean, they value Wi-Fi, they're not willing to pay for it, but they're
Yep.
willing to take the train if there is free Wi-Fi. So it's one of those things that it really requires a different way to look at things. And in this case, oddly enough, we had to get Excel to tell us that because we were not smart enough to realize it, without that.
Yep.
I would say that's the value of models. They teach you something that you did not see before because you have your own, biases and whatever.
Yep.
So anyway, so now because and at that time everybody was charging for Wi-Fi, so it was kind of like a different position that we
Yeah.
went
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. It felt a little dangerous to go with free
Yeah.
Wi-Fi because, all these, I mean, the US train market's teeny tiny compared to Europe and Asia and stuff. So we thought, well, we must be doing something wrong here.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, the rest of those have really come our way because, or not our way, we don't own this, but it's the idea is that it's kind of the stay in your lane, do what you do best, offer a good competitive
Mhm.
travel service, and this is just another way to be competitive. In the
Yeah.
US, it's you're competing against different things than maybe in the European market.
Yeah, but now who charges for Wi-Fi? I
I
mean, unless you offer something really special
Yeah,
or you might, but by and
it's just
large.
it's too hard to control the externalities on that. I mean, the only reason that you could would maybe be if you had a trackside service and you could really control the pipes, but it's even then it's kind of risky and I think the differentiator and the administration of that too is also fraught with customer service issues. So
Which is very expensive
yeah,
and you just become very unpopular. So that's,
yeah,
that's one thing. Okay, so let's move forward. So we have Wi-Fi now. So we need to tackle another problem. You decided you need to tackle another problem, right? What was the
yep.
next thing?
Well, um, the system that we had initially, I'll call it the first generation system, the first real commercial generation, the first generation system, either wasn't quite reliable enough or monitored well enough. We didn't have the resources with it. So we had worked with Amtrak on that, and nobody kind of really knew what to do with it. And it seemed we needed to get it more stable and better monitored. So we went, it was also time, and this is in the rail industry, these cars last 30 years, and the technology that does all this stuff, some parts are obsolete sort of in 3 years. So it's a real tough rhythm thing. You got to kind of rethink about the delivery model. And what we did for a second generation system, we worked with a company that helped us kind of rethink things. And I go to a conference every year in London around this system for different operators around the world. DB, everybody comes to it. But the idea is that you share information at that conference. And we got the idea of kind of going with more of a service model and procuring it a little bit differently so that you're not buying something and letting it age in place. You're buying a service and you replace the pieces as you need. And then you have a really strict, um, I'd say, oversight and reporting scheme to it, which means that you have a much more stable system. It takes a good amount of resources, but the quality is much better, and it's not like randomly it's not working one day. So we had to get to that very stable point, and that's what we did coming into like 2018, 2019. And that's been working really well. And when that happened, then we had the opportunity to work and blend this other initiative that we were working on, which was contactless payments on the train. So we needed a really stable environment to build upon to put an application that runs off the train Wi-Fi. And I can talk a little bit about why the system was put on the train Wi-Fi as opposed to at stations. But contactless payment was kind of our next big application. So we
Yeah.
came to that only because we had a very stable system.
Now, let me just say something for the international audience out there. And you might think that in the US, everybody uses their phone to pay, and you can do on travel transportation and use that. None of that. And I find it really shocking, but that's the way it is. So actually, it's not, paying with your phone is relatively, I mean, it's not as common in the US as it is anywhere else for reasons that are unknown to me. That's not my field. And on public transportation, especially, and I guess that because public transportation is also a little bit more of a, it's not as important. So in London, it's just like it's absolutely beautiful system. You go, you don't have to do or know anything. You just go with your phone and it works. Absolutely. In the US, not quite. We're not quite there yet anywhere as far as I'm aware of. And so keep that in mind because Jim is going to tell us why. Because now after talking to him, I understand why is it. The complexity of it is, I think, is kind of different in the US. So why don't you tell us what is that you guys did now that I.
Well, there's a lot of factors that come into play with that. Um, I think the US folks are getting used to paying with their phone or smartwatch, like at the coffee shop, in those little square devices that pop up at retail. That's that's starting to come along, but also contactless credit cards come along too. So you've kind of got these either contactless credit cards or smart devices, or um, so using those is what people are finding quite convenient. But transit came from this era of having, hard tickets, had the little mag stripe reader, and then an innovation that was done probably in the late 90s or so. Then they went to closed loop payments, and that would have been like your Oyster card and other cards that you're turning your money into transit money. And then it's stored on this card, but it's a closed loop system, meaning the money stays within the transit system. And you can't take your card and go off to a department store and buy something with your transit money. So the TFL was very important in London, along with others, in getting what's called contactless payments going. That's working with the credit card industry, where you just show up and it's an open loop system, and you can use your credit card to buy coffee and to buy transit and a whole host of other things. It's just normal, or you use your smartphone. So bringing that idea of customer convenience to transit was definitely proved out in TFL. I think New York has it. Other big cities will have that, and that's kind of the next evolution off the closed loop system. Open loop is the next thing coming, and it's super convenient. But in the US, in the passenger rail market, there's some key differences. In London, you either have a gated system in the tube, and you naturally tap either your closed or open loop system there. But in the US, on the passenger train market, you typically don't have gates. You just have an open system, and you walk up, and you would have proven to the conductor, either I have one of those paper tickets or I have it now on my phone. I have the app on my phone, and I have a barcode, and I'm going to prove I paid when the conductor or inspector comes by. So to get contactless payments working, we had to think about where we were going to put contactless payment readers. Were they going to be at stations where people would walk by a place and tap and go, I'm getting on at this station, and then walk off at their destination station and tap off? Or were we going to do it on the train? And we picked on the train because the complexity of doing a civil works project with cement and electrical was just too daunting at all of our stations. So we said, we have this infrastructure, it's reliable, and we'll put the contactless payment on the trains. So that's the first decision. Then there's all sorts of complexities in launching that, and that's what we started launching in March.
May I ask a question
Yeah.
here? I mean, you could have a situation, kind of an in-between situation where you don't have a real barrier like you have in London, but you might have a place where you tap, like in Seattle, we have that. So it's not a barrier, but if I have, a digital ticket, I just tap.
Yep.
Couldn't you have some in-between thing? Or was
Well,
it
we
just,
had, yeah, you have to have something that's powered and mounted and in the flow of passenger travel. And then doing that takes working with certain partners that own all the infrastructure all the way back to that, to bring power to it. They have to cut the pavement to lay the lines in. And so there's this more spatial architectural engineering solution that seemed to be too complex to do at a station, and also fraught with vandalism and other things like that. So we pretty much said, I can predict that future, and I don't see an easy path to it. And we are doing another project that's at stations, and it's kind of a nightmare. It's a lot of differences and permits from this city, permits from that city. So we said, we control our universe here on the train. We'll just put it on the train. And the nice thing about that is, in addition to having it on the train, all your data comes from that interface. So it does make it for a monitorable system a little easier. And that was just our decision. Others are doing things differently. If we had owned our stations, which we don't, we might have made that option. And
oh yeah, because you don't
the
know,
others,
yeah. So
yeah,
which is the joint power authority part,
yes,
is the joint
yes,
part here that
yeah,
that tells you the complexity.
yeah,
Because again, but I guess it's the same model that you have in a bus, right? I mean,
yeah. You have to. So owning your infrastructure is a big deal, and we don't own our infrastructure because that's owned by the freight company, and then each station is generally owned by the local jurisdiction. But then we have Amtrak coming in as a contract operator on top of that. It's like, no, yeah, it's like
I understand. Yeah, yeah, it's just like a
it's
complete
too
nightmare.
advanced.
Yeah.
So we were
Okay.
like, we solved for the simplicity, quote, of putting it on the train because we had the good Wi-Fi
Mhm.
backhaul system, and it hardly uses many data at all. But as soon as we launched with it, there's a whole bunch we had to learn and things we had to do that are unique to the rail industry, and so I can get into some of those things. So
So that's only part one of the complexity, but then the real complexity was farther down the road, right?
yes, so probably the most complex thing that's come at us, and it would have come at us anyway, is um, I guess it's a rule, or it's the way a rule has been applied by Amtrak, that you have to have a manifest of who's on the train. And this came out of there was actually, it was a commuter rail accident in Southern California, the Chatsworth accident. They had a problem, crashed, people were injured or worse, and nobody knew who was on the trains. The loved ones were like, well, who's on that train? So this is in the early 2000s, and so a judgment call was made through legislation, not specifically for this, but the plan came together that will require a manifest list because and Amtrak, even though it was intercity and this was a commuter rail that did this, they interpreted that they could do a manifest list and they should do a manifest list because Amtrak sold all the tickets on intercity rail in the US. So they could make you type in your name and there you were. You were probably going to be on that train. And once you were on that train, once the conductor came by, they would be able to scan your ticket. And sure enough, yes, you were on that train. You could be assigned, even if you had an unreserved service. Your name was already in the system, and then you were linked to that train right there. So, how to do that when you have contactless payments? So, this isn't, you don't have to go to a coffee shop and register with Starbucks or register with a department store to make your contactless payment, but in rail you do, in intercity rail you do, because you have to create that manifest list. So that already makes it unnatural in terms of the way it was intended. But we do have a method when we did our trial or pilot here to have people register their cards and say, well, this is the card I'm going to use. And it would be checked that, yep, okay, now we have your name. So it works really well because, in fact, it works faster than the conductor can because as soon as you tap in digitally, with data, we know you're on the train. And so the manifest list is very accurate. But it's also from a whole contactless EMV, that's the standard that's used with contactless. It's a little unnatural. It's not really the way it was intended. But that has driven a lot of the issues here because you signed up for that credit card. Oh, my credit card got stolen. Or I got a new card. Can I re-register? And the credit card industry that was supporting us was not used to this requirement. They had built it for testing purposes, but they didn't have this manifest requirement. So they weren't used to going back in and editing. So there was one email associated with one card. And when that card disappeared or got replaced, it wasn't talking, it was broken. It was like, oh, no, we got to fix this because this is what happens in life. People get new cards and things like that. So we got involved in having to work with the vendor and change the software and the data to update that. That's just one area that we had to work on to make sure that this registration process could be flexible enough to replace a credit card if you got it lost or stolen or reissued and things like that. So there was complexity at that level. But it was all understood. It was like you just had to work your way through it. And that's kind of where we are at this point in time. We've worked our way through that. So that is just one area of it. The other areas are they were going to be there anyway, apart from manifest or not, but it's location services. How does a tap know that you tapped in at this station and are tapping out at that station? What if you tapped in, got validated by the conductor, and then quickly tapped out and then went right back to your seat and took a nice long journey for the price of just a quick jaunt? So there's all this back end checking and making sure there's not violations and fair, kind of fair evasion on that. So there's that. Then there's the idea of, does Apple or Android let you scan credit cards that have tapped in? The other issue is, why is it just credit cards? Why can't you use your smartphone or smartwatch? And so those are also other areas, and I can go into those if you want, but it's all been a little bit off kilter from what you might expect. And the manifest list is the reason that you can only use credit cards right now, because when you register a card, what I think a lot of people don't know, and you get that card, enters your iPhone or whatever space, it's not the same card number as on your card. It gets translated into something else for security reasons. And so when you're registering, you can't just go to your phone and go, well, I'm always going to use my phone. I just need to put my credit card number in here. And well, where is that? What is my credit card number? You can't extract it and have it readable and type it into this website. So it always has to be a credit card for right now, as long as there's manifest requirements, because otherwise there's no good way to register. So it's just credit cards only for now. If we can get the manifest situation changed, the other aspect of the manifest is that if a train goes down, they would know, well, we had these kind of credit cards were on the train. Well, who owns that? Well, just finding that out is not something the credit cards want to do for privacy reasons. So you don't have an easy replaceable manifest list just because you have a credit card number, at least not in time. I mean, they can do FBI investigations or what have you to do that. But so there's a lot of things because of that manifest list that kind of hurt us. But we've adapted to it. We're learning. We're really still in a pilot program right now, but it's you can kind of see to use a train metaphor, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. That it may
The
work.
real, yeah, you have the real tunnel. But it's really fascinating to hear this, to hear the detail, because we often go, "I was not working," and you complain about it without necessarily understanding that there are people trying to do their best. It's just more complex than it should. Like all those issues. It just seems like, really? Do we really need to have to go through this? I mean, obviously you do because you have to follow regulations. It's not your fault, but it just seems like the technology could do so much, and yet we're stuck by these kind of regulations, limitations that really slow everything down. But w- in a specific case, if you were to use the wallet, either the Apple or Android version of it, that would have all the credit card information and all the personal information, right? So couldn't you use that to interface and to meet all the manifest regulation?
You probably could. This is the issue where the niche matter of a credit card, even though it's, the hash pan, the last four digits are known and the first four are known, but the important stuff isn't shared. This is the issue of at the module, the EMV reader that you have like in TFL, it just is reading this chip that has this stuff, but it doesn't read the rest of your phone that says, oh, it's Monica. So you'd have to somehow create some hybrid piece for this to actually work out. But it's a fair question. It's like, where can you marry the data within the phone chip, the EMV chip or your God, I forget what it's called, but there's a chip in your phone to do that. How can you bring those two things together? If you could, then yes, smart devices are in the game as long as we can associate with that name. But there's um, a large effort to have privacy with your credit card numbers. And
Yeah,
so I would see that would just be a built-in challenge with that.
yeah. Well, and I guess that kind of raises the whole issue about, privacy and data. What is that you want, can share? It's safe to share. So
Yep,
there is privacy, regulation,
yep.
consent,
Yeah, it's
and all.
NFC is what's in your phone, the NFC reader. Yeah,
And
forgot
yeah,
that.
but I guess the NFC reader, depending on what you do, it might be able to access different information. And so,
Possibly, yeah. We'd have to explore what it can do, but then it would
well,
make
you
the
want
industry.
it to be that way. I don't
Yes,
want to have
exactly.
an NFC reader that wherever I go, everybody can find everything about me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, which is the reason why a lot of people still don't use it, because they don't trust because clearly there is a possibility that you get so much stuff out there in theory.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey Jim, unfortunately, we have to go, but this is very interesting. As I said, this is really a lot of detail that oftentimes get lost to understand the complexity. It's not just you have a demo, everything works, and oh, how good it is. Is to understand how much work goes into it. I think that really makes it interesting to appreciate that when it works, it actually, there was a lot of work behind it.
Yeah, and it's in different industries, so it makes me think this must be happening in other places that I don't even know about. I just take it for granted that it works. So it is a lesson in that, and it creates some gray hair just to kind of work it out. But and there's many partners that we're working with to pull this off. So the thanks goes out to them. They'll know who they are. So anyway, a pleasure to
Well,
talk with
thank
you.
you. So pleasure talking to you. Again, it was great. And thank you all for listening in. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.